There was a heavy snowstorm that year, and I was sitting at the table around 7 p.m. at my family's ranch, chatting and eating with my parents. The grassland in winter was extremely cold, and our ranch was located in a remote area without regular electricity, so I had to light up wax. There was only one candle for a family of 3, and all 3 of us looked like characters from a bad horror movie. It was snowy and windy that day, and the wind outside was howling. My dad said that such heavy snow would definitely freeze people to death. In our area, several people freeze to death every winter. This is normal, and we are not surprised by it. My dad said that there was a pasture on this pasture. It was winter, it was such a dark night, and there was such a heavy snowstorm. There were 3 people in the house, grandparents and an 18-year-old grandson. It suddenly snowed that day. Grandpa was worried that the door of the sheep pen was not closed tightly, and he was afraid that the sheep would run out, so he had to close the door. The grandson volunteered and went there with a flashlight without letting Grandpa go. It was less than 50 meters away and took 20 minutes, but the grandson didn't come back. Grandpa was worried and went out to look for his grandson with a flashlight. During this period, Grandma received a call from her son saying that the road was blocked due to heavy snow. He was supposed to arrive that night and had to go early the next morning. Grandma briefly explained the situation of the pasture to her son. After hanging up the phone call, she found that the 2 men had not come back yet, so she decided to go out and look for them too. When their son arrived the next day, he found that the grandson, Grandpa, and Grandma had all frozen to death near their home, and the distance was less than 10 meters. I still don't understand why my dad talked about this on such a windy and snowy night. When the sun was in Mudian in January 2009, one afternoon around 4 o'clock, a passing pickup truck did not close the door of the mesh fence when leaving, because at that time the livestock, mainly horses, of several herdsmen next door were always coming over and eating the forage that had been tied up at his house, and they always come in at night, which is quite troublesome, so he have to close the door in time to save himself from going out to patrol again at night. So he went out with a flashlight and a military coat, preparing to close the door about 1 kilometer away. Less than 5 minutes after he left the house, it suddenly started snowing. The ruts that had just been trampled by the car disappeared in an instant. The snow was so dense that the brightness of the flashlight couldn't penetrate at all. After walking for more than 20 minutes, he still didn't see the net fence and realized that he was going in the wrong direction. He looked up to find the moon, but he couldn't see it at all. When he turned around, he couldn't see any footprints. All traces of his passing were instantly covered by heavy snow. At that time, he wanted to walk in one direction. As long as he could find the fence, he would be able to find his home. So he walked for about 30 minutes. Then he found that he couldn't find the direction at all. He started to get anxious. At that time, he remembered the incident of his father, mom, and the grandson that froze to death. There was still some fear in his heart, and the worst plan he could think of was to resist all night. As long as he could survive until the snow stopped, there would be no problem, and it wouldn't be too far from home anyway. But snow has no meaning at all, and the feeling of being alone and helpless is particularly terrifying. Standing alone in the vast blizzard, facing the howling winter wind, he always feels that there may be something hidden behind the heavy snow, waiting for an opportunity to attack him. After standing still for about 2 hours, he finally heard someone calling his name, and he responded loudly, but the wind was too loud and he couldn't tell the specific direction. Fortunately, he finally found the location of the sound. The people who came to look for him were his brother and an uncle from his family. They came out to look for him together. They went out 30 minutes after him. When they saw the heavy snow, they went out to look for him. When they returned home that night, they took off their clothes. After taking off the military coat, he found that his body was soaked with sweat. To be honest, he was ready to have his leg amputated the next day. A relative at home was drunk and passed out outside one winter. When he was found, all his fingers and toes were frostbitten. In the end, all his fingers and toes were amputated except for 2 thumbs. Later, he could only make a living by begging on the train. In those years, I could still meet him on a short train ride. In fact, in the wild, especially in a blizzard environment, freezing to death is an extremely slow process. If the person involved is not drunk, he will always be in 2 states of being rescued and recognizing reality and switching back and forth. In the end, he gradually lost his last vitality and fear and became an ice sculpture. The state of the last struggle before death will be preserved for a long time.